Washington is sending a Pac-12 record 13 players to the NFL Combine.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Rome Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Make sure you check out all of our written work in their respective locations. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, if you join today, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So Lars, really cool news has been just kind of coming out over the last couple of days of 13 Huskies were invited to the NFL Combine. And shockingly enough, there could have been even more, maybe 15 or even 16 guys that got the invitation, but 13 invites to the Combine. And a couple of them, I saw somebody post the other day, like, oh, Devin Culp was a really surprising name that got an invitation. But no, this is really cool. And it goes back to a point that we've been making all season long, where I know I was saying it really early on, and you were there as well, where it's Washington could have the most players drafted of any team this year. And it looks like it might be either them or Michigan, because Michigan broke a record with sending 18 players to the Combine this year.
Right, and it's kind of symbolic of how the season turned out, right? Because two of the two teams that played in the national championship, right, Michigan and Washington. And then when you look at the game, Michigan honestly came into the game with more, just a better roster, right? In terms of if you're going to put the two rosters against each other, Michigan had a couple more guys at a couple more positions, and that turned out to be the difference in the game. It wasn't a massive difference, right? It wasn't TCU, Georgia, where you're just getting slaughtered left and right. But this is also one thing we said coming into the season, where everybody said no last season, right? Everybody came back last season. Rome would have gone probably to the Combine last year. Multiple guys that are now going.
Oh, most of those guys would have gone last year, yeah.
Right, exactly. So this is because Washington didn't have anybody drafted last year, because there was I couldn't even tell you who probably went to the Combine from Washington last year, to be honest. I mean,
nobody.
I was gonna say, I'm even saying, Wayne Talapapa. There's probably a couple of guys that you could have tried to make just a case for just a charity case for, right? Not a charity case in the sense of like they had a good enough resume to say,
but it was
much like Devin Culp this year, where it's okay. Is he like does his numbers jump out? Are you like, wow, this guy's gonna be a top day 2 pick or day, maybe not, but when you just kind of look at what he's done over the course of his career and how, again, we always talk about it. He started out as a running back at Gonzaga Prep, right? He's an athlete.
Right.
So he's a guy to where now that he's worked himself into what the new age tight end could be as a blocker and more so as a receiver, there's a number of these guys where as long as they test well, that you can kind of find a way on a roster, right? There's special teams, there's, backup roles. I mean, you don't hear the name Drew Sample a lot, but it's second round pick. Already
still plays a role with the Cincinnati Bengals, yeah.
But still, exactly, and almost kind of like Will Dissly, where you look at his targets and he's not Travis Kelce, but they're just as integral to those schemes that they play in on offense. And so, just because Devin Culp doesn't have, I can't think of a Brock Bowers type numbers, and I'm not. There's obviously a significant gap between those two, but I'm just saying you can still find a way to have an impact in the NFL, and it all starts going to the Combine.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's the big thing where you look at a Devin Culp, and we're going to get to him more in the next segment, because he's somebody who could really blow up the Combine with some pretty impressive numbers. And you look at some of the other guys who were sent, where, I remember especially seeing it on social media where Oregon fans were, oh, well, there are no Huskies drafted. There weren't any Huskies doing this or that. And it was because they all came back for this. And I know Husky fans, our everydayers, they all know this. So let's talk about, for just a quick second here, the guys who didn't make it, where MJ Ale was one where I'm a little surprised he didn't make it, just mainly based on his athletic profile, where I have a feeling that he's going to find his way onto the team, or just onto a team this summer. He'll be at a rookie minicamp, and he's going to turn some heads because people are going to see his frame, his athleticism, and when he really does figure out how to play defensive tackle, he's going to be a decent one, where he can be in a rotation at the NFL level and just find a way to make an impact. But the biggest one really is Tuli Letuligasenoa, where I don't know if this might come back as just a, hey, we're not so sure about his medicals, so we don't really want him to test, or we don't, even though that wouldn't make much sense, because you want to make sure that a guy like that gets checked out with some of the injuries that he's had over his time at Washington. But he's somebody who, like you said with Devin Culp, where his numbers specifically don't jump off the page, but when you turn on the film and you look at how that guy plays, you just say, why wouldn't this guy go to the combine where he can interview in front of teams and he can break down some film, and just you watch him play and say, yeah, this is a dude who has a chance to be probably a mid to late day 3 pick with, between his age and the amount of snaps that he's played and his injury history, where he's never really going to be even a day 2 defensive tackle, but he's somebody you draft on day 3 and you can get a lot out of as a run stuffing defensive tackle, just on a rotation, just where he doesn't have to play a ton of snaps either, because that's just kind of what it comes down to at a certain point too.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing you have to consider with the combine is, I believe, 241 players invited to the combine.
There are 320 that are invited this year.
Okay, 300. So I was honestly going to say under 300, but so right around the 320 mark. The one thing that you know this as well as anybody, when you look at guys that end up popping in the NFL, more often than not, yes, the first rounders are going to work out, but then you have some day 2s and 3s that work out. And that's kind of the point of the draft evaluation process, where the combine is important, but it's not the end all be all, right? If you're Tuli Letuligasenoa or some of these other guys at different schools that don't get a combine invite, you can still be, talking to teams. And then when you have your pro day, that's kind of, you still have a month before the draft, and maybe teams will, hey, let's see how far we can get him to fall, and then we'll pick him up, 6th, 7th round. Certainly if he goes undrafted, he will certainly find a way onto a undrafted free agent deal on a pretty good one. But I'd be surprised if he goes undrafted, because I think 7th round, 6th, 7th round sort of range kind of works for him because of the amount of snaps that he's had. And I think that's more or less what's kind of difficult about the draft process is, wow, this guy with 4 years of production, yeah, he might not have the wow numbers, right? But he's, been there, done that, knows can play a significant role right away. It's kind of just a veteran guy. Why would a team not want that? Well, they actually do want that, but the problem is not every team and most teams don't want to pay that if they don't have to, right? So you'll let a guy fall, and hey, you know what? If no one's mentioning him, cool, we'll just take him in the 7th round and it's a steal for us. We had him as a 2nd round grade, but nobody wanted him and nobody knew about him because they didn't know his injury history or what the case was with that. And so that's why teams kind of manipulate the draft board in various ways. As a result, that's kind of why players end up getting the short end of the stick. But if you get drafted, and you have a contract, so you at least have a shot to make it in the NFL. That's the whole point here.
Right. And it's just that, because again, like you said, that's not the end all be all, where Tuli is somebody who would almost certainly get signed as a UDFA and can find a way to make an impact on a roster through mini camps, through anything else. But I'm just most curious when I look at him and I look at some of these other players, it's all right. You see this production where he's not necessarily going to test very well, but you see that every year with certain guys. And he's somebody who has done enough over the course of his college career and, coming back for an extra season, doing all these extra things where that's not necessarily what you should be looking at. And it's just looking at his body of work and just saying, all right, this is a guy we're going to want to talk to, because pro days are very different from the combine, where, you do all the medical checks at the combine. You're able to sit down and interview with basically every single team while you're there. And you just have a chance to get in front of so many more eyes. Whereas at the pro day, it's all right. We're going to see a whole bunch of teams coming out for Rome Odunze. We're going to see a whole bunch of teams coming out for Michael Penix. But if this is any other year, which is where that will work for him. But if this is any other year where, let's say it is last season, there weren't nearly as many teams where, yeah, they're still going to send guys out there, but we didn't see any Huskies get drafted last year. So it's nice that this all worked out for him this year, but with his body of work, that's somebody who absolutely deserved an invite. And Lars, we're going to stick on the combine because let's talk about who we think might open some eyes at the NFL level. We're going to send a message to our good friends over at FanDuel, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, have live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So Lars, let's talk about some of these guys that are going to make an impact in Indianapolis. And one guy that I'll give him to you because I know you covered his recruitment and everything is Devin Culp. So I kind of want to talk about Jalen Polk here for a second, because Jalen Polk is somebody who the film speaks for itself, where I wrote about him a little bit over on Huskies Wire today. But he's somebody that I don't know how much of his athleticism he really got to display, where he's not a bad athlete, right? But I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a top tier elite athlete in a class where we're going to see guys like Rome Odunze run really well. We're going to see Xavier Worthy run really well. We'll probably see Malik Neighbors just give a fantastic time in 40-yard dash. And while that might not necessarily be Jalen Polk's strength, that might not necessarily set. Let me rephrase that a little bit, where he's not going to be somebody who's going to run a sub 4.4. But with all the other testing drills that he can show, he can prove to be, all right, hey, look, I can be a middle of the second round pick. Maybe I'll sneak up. Maybe I'll even get into the back end of the first round because I have enough athletic traits to get by. But with all my measurables, all my film, everything else that I'm able to do on the field, that might set him apart from some of these other guys who might be drafted in the same range. Like, I just talked about Xavier Worthy, maybe some guys at Florida State, like, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, where they've kind of fallen out of the first round discussion. But if he can show that with his tape and just passable athletic traits, that he could be drafted ahead of them, because his floor sets them apart, where some teams like that high ceiling kind of guy, right? Where we saw Henry Ruggs go ahead of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy a couple of years ago. But we can look at Jalen Polk and say, all right, yeah, some teams might prefer Troy Franklin because he's got this all-world kind of upside. But Jalen Polk, you're getting a really solid number 2 receiver out of him, and he can just be a really consistent player for you for years to come.
Yeah, he's not Larry Fitzgerald. He's Anquan Bolton. And if you remember those Arizona Cardinals offenses back in the day, where Larry Fitzgerald is your Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison, the freak of nature, the absolute, your A1 receiver. But as that Arizona Cardinals offense showed back in the day, if you can have a pretty solid 1B option, that's exactly what you need. You could have 2,000-yard receivers. That's what Rome Odunze and Polk were at Washington, right? That's what these guys showed is, hey, not only can we handle not always getting the targets and not doing whatever, but we can still produce at a high level. So it's not like, hey, you have to target us 6, 7, 8 times a game. Polk was kind of one of those consistent, 3 or 4 catch for like 110 yards kind of guy, where it's, wow, he's not getting a ton of catches, but when he does, aside from the Oregon State game, he makes it count. So that's, and when it matters most, there's so many catches he's made, and is, now I don't want to say a brief UW career, but it's, kind of second part of his UW career, where Penix was just dropping into a bucket. And I honestly thought Polk dropped it, and he just is flipping the ball to the ref because he caught it, made it so casual. And I think that's kind of what teams are going to look at. And Anquan Bolton, if you remember, was a mid-50s round pick back in the day. And that's, Polk might go a little bit higher than that, but that's basically the exact same thing, where you're getting likely low first round talent in the mid-second round. And I think any team is going to be lucky to get Jalen Polk. And so I think he's going to be able to kind of show it in Indy the kind of full package, if you will, right? He's going to show his catch rate. He's going to show his hands. He's going to show all this and that, where, again, we can talk about one guy that, in that similar vein that I wanted to kind of bring back around is Roger Rosengard, right? Because, again, similar to wide receiver, the offensive line, especially the offensive tackle class.
This class is really deep. It's really, really deep.
And so when we were talking a couple of months ago, about a month ago, about does Roger come back? Does he not? I was always in the camp of he does not, right? Because the more you looked at it, even before Jerez Party, it was like he comes from Valor Christian with Ben Hamilton and Tyler Columbus as his high school position coaches, not as head coaches, right? Not a head coach. Yeah. 2 former NFL offensive linemen, a guard and a tackle, helping him in high school, and then you have Scott Huff, who has developed even from his days at Boise State, Ezra Cleveland, a number of guys at Boise State and Washington to the NFL. Now, when people see that Scott Huff is going to the Seahawks, it's not just because it's Seattle, right? It's like it just happens to be in Seattle, but Scott's certainly more qualified than not to be in the NFL coaching in the offensive line. So for Roger, can he move up some of those boards a little bit? Because one thing that I've always liked about him is his athleticism, right? His ability to move, his ability. He has strength, right? He's not strong. He's not tiny by any stretch of the imagination, but he's always struck me as he's not a stiff tackle, right? He's not kind of more like Caleb McGarry, where it's like he's 6'7", 6'8", but also like if I need you to pull, you can pull, but it doesn't look as natural with Roger whereas with Roger could easily lead the way, pull left or right, doesn't matter, can play left tackle or right tackle, even in a backup role. So I think that if Roger can kind of cement his testing and interview well with some teams, I can see him. Again, he's not going to vault up into the, first.
He can be a second round pick for sure.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So I'm really glad you mentioned him because he's somebody else who I wrote about a little bit over on Huskies Wire, where I mentioned that he was able to impress on the field at the Senior Bowl. It was really great that he was able to go down there. He played really well, and he got to open some eyes against some really tough competition just at tackle, where he had Talisi Fuaga on his team, who some people have going in the top 10 now, where there was a whole lot that he's able to do on the field. And now if he can back that up with solid testing numbers, which you and I have seen him play for years, and we've seen that, yeah, he has the ability to put up some really, really nice numbers, not necessarily like 40-yard dash stuff, but short splits, 3-cone drill, all these other things that NFL teams look for, where I've been mentioning him in the same light as, shout out to Jed Fish and Brendan Carroll and the Arizona staff, as Jordan Morgan, where that's another guy who is probably going to be taken somewhere, I would say, in the top 50. And especially because there's going to be a run on offensive tackles at some point in the first round where we could see 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe. There's going to be a lot of offensive linemen that go off the board in the first round. So that's going to push some of these other guys up the board, and some of the teams that might have missed out, instead of trading back up for one, just saying, all right, we're going to sit here at the top of round 2 and we're just going to take Roger Rosengarten, which is great because, like you said, he can play left tackle, he can play right tackle. There are a whole lot of different things that he can do. And he's still going to make solid money and be able to justify coming out instead of being like, oh no, I was, a late 3rd round pick, early 4th round pick where could have come back in a 2025, maybe been a 1st round pick. You're still making a name for yourself against a whole bunch of other really talented rookies. And Lars, with that being said, let's circle back around to Devin Culp, because this is the guy who we think might hit between him and Dominique Hampton. I think they might be the 2 most all around athletically impressive Huskies that we're going to see at the combine.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is that's what was cool to see about Devin this past season, was he really kind of rounded himself out, and he got rid of the drops. I mean, he still had some, but it was nowhere near what we had kind of come to know and see from him. And he truly became that second option where Jack Westover would get some of them, but it was Michael Penix was just as willing to throw to Devin Culp. And I think with Devin, he's able to do a number of different things. Again, obviously, he's a better split-out player than he is a blocker, right? He's not necessarily massive like ASJ was back in the day, where it's like, hey, you can leave him certainly without question, or even Drew Sample, right, where you can leave him in as a blocker. Whereas I think with the new age of the NFL, not just with the Travis Kelce, but I think just the way the kind of position and the offenses are going, being able to do a multitude of things. I mean, we could even see him line up as an H-back. There's a number of things. I think that's why I'm really curious to see, to your point, how Devin tests, because if his numbers come back good, and again, it's not just about the numbers, right? But as long as his numbers don't push him down, I think he could be one of the Huskies that rises up most on the draft boards come post combine.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because the same can be said for Dominique Hampton, where he's somebody who was asked to play a multitude of positions. He played outside corner, he played Husky, he played safety. He did a little bit of everything, and it felt like he really sort of started to get into his niche at safety, where it's clear there's still a couple of things that he needs to work on, as you can say with basically everybody in this class. And if he tests really well, that's something where I could see him being pushed up as high as maybe even the 4th or 5th round, because a team is going to see what he can do athletically and look at his body type and look at everything that he's done so far, learning a multitude of positions and just saying, yes, we believe in our coaching staff. This is somebody who we can throw in on special teams. We like him a lot there, and we can find a way to carve out a role for him, whether it be a special teams kind of guy, where look at Matthew Slater with the Patriots. He never played a snap really on offense and was still somebody who was a contributor for a long time, or can say, all right, no, we like this guy in the nickel. We like him at safety. We think that he can do enough to get by, and we continue to teach him because we really like our coaching staff and what we're able to do development wise and put him in a position to succeed. So I'm really intrigued to see if he can test really well in some of those same areas where it seems like he will. It seems like he can check all those boxes, and because that's what the combine is. It's for the most part, it's reaffirming evaluations you already had, and then there are always some surprises. And Dom is somebody who could certainly surprise some people. And with that being said, let's jump in because we did see another signing today on Wednesday that was added to the Washington roster, and we might see one or two more. Right after we sent a message to our good friends over at Game Time, because the baseball season is coming up. And Lars, you know how excited I am to go watch my Red Sox be absolutely mediocre this season. And that season starts right here in Seattle with the Mariners. And I'm just so excited to use Game Time to buy some tickets for that, because Game Time they have killer last minute deals, all in prices viewed from receipt, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Some of the coolest things about Game Time is it's so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. And with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and so much more, you'll always make sure that you're getting the best deal possible, because Game Time is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals for tickets on football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And with zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $20 off with code LOCKEDON. Just terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So, Lars, we saw Audric Harris, the 3-star wide receiver from Bishop Gorman, sign officially on Wednesday. We heard there was never any wavering on his commitment to Washington, that there were a couple of just issues to be worked out behind the scenes that were nothing major. So it looks like everything got resolved, and he did sign on February 14th. And I know we talked about him a little bit last week, but this is a guy where even when we've seen Vincent Holmes officially make the move from safety to wide receiver, that he's still a guy who could have an impact in 2024.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think that's what we talked about kind of, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but it's just a matter of when you look at the room, yes, you have Jeremiah Hunter and Giles Jackson, but after that, everybody else is fighting for spots. And I think when you pair that with Jed Fish, and I'm assuming Kevin Cummings and Kevin Cummings would agree that, hey, you know what? Until somebody separates to that position, everyone's going to get reps, right? All the freshmen and redshirt freshmen are getting reps, and it's almost like give us a reason not to play you instead of we're not going to play you, right? Just until you give us a reason to not play you, we're going to give you every chance to succeed. And I think Audric, when you just look at his tape, I mean, there's a lot of potential. Now, again, you do have Rashad Williams, Keith Reynolds, Tayshawn Lyons transferred out, so this is kind of also maybe a bridge in that regard as well, where Jeremy Bernard goes out. So there's a number of opening spots here that guys can take, even with Vincent Holmes, to your point, flipping over.
So I'm glad you mentioned the name Tayshawn Lyons, because there are certain parts of his film that remind me a lot of Tayshawn's film when he was coming out of Tennessee in California, because he's got the same level of speed where I think Audric might be just a tick faster. But what I like is that it's finding ways to get him the ball in open space and just letting him do his job, where you can, and that's something where that's super easy to find ways to work him into the offense early on, where it's okay, we can dial up some deep shots for him down the sideline, because it looks like he's going to be enrolled in time for spring practice, which may have been where some of these issues came from in terms of being able to graduate early from Bishop Gorman, and why his NLI was delayed. But he was able to get all that worked out. And it's something where getting him involved early is going to be really interesting, where I don't think that this is the kind of guy where you want to burn his red shirt, and especially when you look at the other freshman receivers that you have in Jason Robinson and Justice Williams. But he's somebody where, okay, yeah, we can find a way to dial up some shot plays for this guy. And it's something where we can install these plays early on and just say, all right, if we need this, we have it in our bag, where he's somebody who he runs a lot of plays from the slot. And I know we talked about it the last time we had this discussion, where he can clear out a lot of stuff and, work underneath a lot of like what Cooper Kupp was able to do on some of his routes during his time with the Rams when Jed Fish was also there. And these are things that Jed Fish was able to pick up on, where it's, Cooper runs a lot of deep routes out of the slot, where that's something that you can see Audric Harris doing, where I'm by no means comparing the two players because they play very different styles. But you can just see some of those same route concepts involved in Jedd Fisch's offense because, he learned under Sean McVay and he said he likes to run a lot of the same stuff. So I'm just really curious to see if that's something that they might want to install with him early on. And with that being said, are we going to see any other additions? Because there are two names out there that we've talked about that the everydayers know. Cornerback Tacario Davis, who's still in the transfer portal, and the other one is running back Rashad Amos, where offensive linemen, we might see a couple. We're expecting them to wait until April to sign the majority of the offensive line that they might need, or until some other guys might be able to enter the transfer portal. But it seems like those are the two big names that are still outstanding.
And kind of ironically, in a way, that you look at both positions, I think Davis you want more just because even though you have depth, with Devon Bryant, Elijah Jackson, and then obviously the redshirt freshmen that are coming back and all that. But when you look at, you have Rashad Price that transferred in, you had Jordan Shaw that transferred in. So you kind of look at the depth at cornerback and say, okay, obviously we do want Davis, no question about it, because if you have Elijah and Banks in your two deeps with Ephesians Pricelock and Tacario Davis starting, it's like that's a perfect two deep for you, right? I mean, they might not like it, right? Because Elijah's going from a starter to a backup, but there's a way to make that kind of work and bridge that gap, right?
Right.
When you look at running back, you do have Tybo Rogers coming back as a sophomore, but then you have Will Nixon, Daniel Ngata, Sam Adams, and Adam Hoffman. No. They're seeing all three of those specific guys that I mentioned in a really weird cluster where Sam Adams got a chance to play this past season, but didn't necessarily separate himself in his battle of injuries throughout his career. Richard Newton, the guy who had battle injuries, is now graduated. Will Nixon kind of was looking good at portions and then just really kind of seemed to tail off. And Daniel Ngata was raved about by Ryan Grubb and then never once got a chance to show what he has back there. So when you look at three different running backs that you want to get something out of, if you're Scotty Graham, somebody's going to have to transfer out, especially with Adam Muhammad coming in, right? So you want to keep that log. You don't want to have too much log jam in there. So when you look at Davis, probably is the one, if you're going to take one of those two, you take him. But at the same point, you can never have enough healthy running backs, but you also would be like 8 scholarship running backs at that point.
Right. And that's something where you would expect, like you said, one or even two guys to maybe transfer out in the spring portal, where you never know what's going to happen. There are situations that arise all the time. And like you said, it's just nice to have a deep stable of running backs. And maybe the coaching staff does like Tybo Rogers. Maybe they say, all right, well, we don't like some of the other options that we have right now for, just being unsure with injuries or whatever else it might be. So we want to make sure we can add one more talented back. And Rashad Amos is a really interesting prospect because he has 2 years of eligibility. He was really impressive. He's a former SEC guy where he didn't play a lot at South Carolina, transfers to Miami of Ohio, does really well there, and now is looking to bounce back to Power 5, where he looks like he's somebody who might want to stay for 1 year and go to the NFL draft, which maybe is why, if he's still considering Washington, hasn't announced any sort of commitment to come here, because coming here would be a 2-year gig for somebody like him, because there's Jonah Coleman and Cam Davis where he could still get a little bit of run, but it's not going to be nearly in the same vein as it would be if, say, Jonah Coleman doesn't come here or Cam Davis does decide to go to the NFL draft, where if there's, that 1B that's still able to be filled, that helps him out. But then on the side of Tacario Davis, that's a guy where we got a couple of comments from some of the everydayers saying, oh, you'd make a lot of the guys in the room really mad if you went out and got Tacario Davis, because there's so many young guys, there's so many talented players in that room. But one thing Jedd Fisch said in his National Signing Day press conference is you never turn down talent. And there's a legitimate argument to be made that Tacario Davis is going to be a top 4 or 5 cornerback in the Big Ten this season if he were to make that transfer. He's got the same size profile as Ephesians Pricelock, where he's a big, long, talented cornerback. He's really sticky in man coverage and does everything you'd ask for him. He was the highest graded cornerback in the Pac-12 this past season by Pro Football Focus. So that he's got the ability, he's got the talent. And if John Richardson, Vinny Sunseri, Steve Belichick, they say, hey, no, we need another guy like that. We need to make sure we find a way to close the deal. There's got to be a way to make sure that gets done, because he did enter the transfer portal with the do not contact tag, which means he might have an idea of where he's going. But the other thing, with the other distinction of the do not contact tag, that means that if he is interested in going to that school, that the player is allowed to reach out to you. So there are some ways to maybe figure out how to make that happen, but it does still feel like it's down to either returning to Arizona or coming to Washington for him.
Right. And I think if you're Washington, that's also why having resources, whether you say resources in parentheses, NIL or not, that's why, because we saw Simply Seattle do something with Devon Banks and some of the other kind of returning defensive backs. So you'd have to imagine, okay, well, so Devon's safe, right? And then Elijah Jackson was singled out by Jed Fish in his press conference as somebody who's been coming to his office every day, hey, really trying to learn, really want to stay here and all this. And I don't think that's Elijah doing that to say, hey, like, you don't need Tacario. Hey, you don't need Tacario. Hey, you don't need Tacario. It's just, hey, like, I'm ready to show up and work. But when you look at Jed and say, okay, how do I make all this work? I need people around me pouring into Montlake Futures so that we can afford to build a roster that happens to be competitive and deep, right? Where sure, Elijah might not like, okay, I got to earn my starting spot again. But if he's getting 300, 400, 500 snaps and Tacario Davis, comes for 1 year and goes, and then Elijah stays for maybe one more year and goes, or goes back to the old DBU days where it's just, hey, 3 or 4 guys are going and maybe Elijah goes in the second, third round, but he's impressed enough to show teams, hey, I could actually be a day 2 pick sort of thing. Why not do that, right? Because if you're Elijah, where are you going to go, right? Your first cornerback coach is in the NFL. Your last cornerback coach hasn't found another job yet. So when you kind of just look at what the landscape would be, I mean, unless you're trading Tacario Davis to Arizona for Elijah Jackson, it's like that doesn't make any sense. So it does make sense to get both. It's just a matter of how can Jed do that. And I will say, isn't it nice to have a coach, if you're a Washington fan, that actually is not only open to that, but kind of wants that, where it's like, hey, I kind of want both of them, instead of where, maybe the Chris Peterson days of, hey, we're going to get this 4-star and then we're going to get a bunch of walk-ons behind him so he doesn't feel threatened.
Right. No, that's a really great point. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And please feel free to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content that we got coming your way, because we do have so much fun stuff coming for you over the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, please feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere, updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to hit like on the video. Leave us a comment down below if you're audio only. Please leave us a 5-star review. It all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.